welcome to this session on Year 11 revisions. We're going to look at two sections in this video. We're going to look at conflict and cooperation from 1918 to 1939, and we're going to look at 4.1 appeasement. So we're going to look at the interpretation side of the course as well. A quick outline of the content and the course and the questions you're going to be asked. Two questions in section 1 based on international relations and the events that we're going to talk about soon. They're worth 5 and 10 marks, and then question 3 and question 4 are worth 20 and 25 and 25 marks each, and they're based on different interpretations. So you've all been provided with one of these. It is the personal learning checklist. So this is everything you need to know, and this revision video is not by any means going to contain everything you need to know, but it's a good starting place to do your own revision. So I cannot stress that you need to look at where your strengths, where your weaknesses lie, and focus on different areas rather than just use this solely as revision. So conflict and cooperation, we've got the Versailles Peace Treaty through to the League of Nations, the disagreements in the 30s and the impact of that all the way up until the outbreak of war. So the first section is the Paris Peace Agreement. End of World War I, just a reminder, 40 million people dead. It really is a huge question. How do we get lasting peace in Europe? Germany has surrendered. America, Britain, France are now in a situation where they have to decide what to do with Germany. Woodrow Wilson emerges as a particularly strong individual. He's part of a group called the Big Three: Georges Clemenceau of France and David Lloyd George of Britain. Each of them bring their own interests. Woodrow Wilson wants to instill his 14 points in the peace agreement. He talks of disarmament of Germany, he talks of no secret treaties, he believes in self-determination of each of the states, and he believes in setting up the League of Nations. His 14 points contain, strangely, 10 other points as well that you need to be aware of. He's kind of a leading figure, and he unfortunately does not get his way entirely. Georges Clemenceau of France has particular reservations about Wilson. He doubts that it can live up to the rhetoric that has been said by Wilson. He thinks that it's naivety and idealistic. He is the leader of a country that was invaded, that was devastated, where the majority of the fighting took place, and he wants to crush them. He wants to make their pips squeak, as he once famously has been called to say. David Lloyd George is kind of a middleman. He's somewhere between. He sides on some agreements with Georges Clemenceau, and on the other hand with Woodrow Wilson. Now the end result is the Treaty of Versailles, and I always use the acronym GARGLE. So these are the key points of the Treaty of Versailles. This is what's decided at the Paris Peace Conference. Guilt, Article 231 of the war, is known as the War Guilt Clause. It's Germany accepting full blame for starting the war. Now the reaction from Germans is exceptionally unfair. They don't believe that they are the main cause, and they don't believe that they should be held responsible. The armed forces of Germany is limited to 100,000 men. No tanks, no submarines, no planes. They're limited to 6 battleships, and there is part of Germany, the Rhineland, which has been demilitarized. No German troops are allowed there, and it's on the border between France, Germany. Now, can you imagine what the reaction, if we were to lose, our army would be? We'd be defenceless. It could potentially leave us open to invasion, and that's how the Germans felt. Reparations is the easiest one to remember. £6.6 billion had to be repaid. On the plans that the Allies put in place, they wouldn't finish repaying it until 1984. Germany lost land. I've stretched the acronym here a little bit, I'll admit. 12.5% of their total population, and they were forbidden from ever starting an Anschluss with their former ally, Austria. They could not unite German people, German-speaking people in Austria and Germany. That was forbidden. Lastly, we've got the League of Nations. Germany was told that they could not join the League of Nations, and indeed they would not join for almost a decade. Can you imagine if Britain was not allowed to be part of the UN? It would have serious resignations with everybody involved. Now there was huge reactions to it. Many Germans didn't believe that they had actually lost the war. They didn't believe that they should be held responsible. They were appalled at losing land. You know, that doesn't fit in with national self-determination, which is one of Wilson's points. And of course they were sick of having to pay all of that money, and it's going to cause a number of problems in the future, as you are already aware. So now we come to the League of Nations, which is Wilson's vision. He raises expectations. He wants it to be a world parliament. He wants it to be a police force intervening where absolutely necessary. It starts with 42 members. By 1939, it has 50 members. So it is successful in that regard, that it manages to get all of these countries involved. The USA, though, you know, the creator under Wilson, it would never join. It would never join. It believed in collective security, that together they would protect each other if one of the other one was attacked. And they believed in using economic sanctions rather than going towards military straight away. They would stop trading, they would stop selling things, they would stop buying things from the country involved. And as a last result, they would take military action in support of against an aggressor nation. Now, on all sides, there was doubts and reservations. David Lloyd George wanted a simple body. The French leaders also thought that it needed its own army, and both of these are key points of the United Nations, that is the successor group of the League of Nations. Furthermore, they've got lots of different groups of the League commissions. So we've got the Refugee Committee, the International Labour Organisation, the Health Committee. It is far from just a group about international security. Now, in the 1920s, there is some successes. We've got the Åland Island disputes in 1921, Upper Silesian settlement in 1921, Corfu, France and Britain can't agree. Mussolini eventually gets his own way with Italy. We've got Bulgaria in 1925. The great powers are united, and so we can certainly say in the 1920s there is some successes in these events. The Corfu crisis in 1923 stands out, as does Bulgaria. But in terms of success, you know, you've got Vilna, the Polish-Lithuanian dispute, that is a success, Upper Silesia, etc. Now, by the 1930s, we've got attempts at disarmament. All of the peace treaties stated that the nations should disarm, and it was the League's role to ensure that it happened, but it really did fail. The Washington Conference in 1921, USA, Japan, Britain and France agreed to the limit their size of their navies, but that was it. That was the extent to which the League of Nations achieved its aim to stop rearmament. So by 1930, we've still got a situation where Britain, France have a very large armed forces, and it is a particular threat to Germany. By 1933, when Adolf Hitler comes in, he then starts to rearm, which of course naturally he does. If they've got an army of 1 million and he has an army of 100,000, he needs to make sure that he can defend himself. Now, we've got some other agreements. We've got the Rapallo Treaty 1922. The USSR and Germany re-established diplomatic relationships between each two. We've got the Dawes Plan, which is the USA lending money to Germany. The Locarno Treaties, which is a big step forward for Germany. They accept the Treaty of Versailles. German people's reaction to this, though, is pretty negative. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, 65 countries renounce war as an option. Again, a toothless act. And lastly, the Young Plan, which reduces the total amount of money to play. So it's very difficult to say whether it was successful in the 1920s. You know, to some extent, it had successes, and in other examples, they certainly didn't. In Bulgaria, 1925, the League succeeded because they worked together. They were united in the decision. In 1923, France and Britain failed to agree in Corfu, and in the end, Mussolini wins. So it's very easy to say on both sides that there were successes and there was failures. Now, the 1930s is a very different time. It's known as the hinge years. The international depression that hits the world in the after 1929 and into the 1930s plays a huge impact. World trade booms in the 1920s. In America, it's known as a successful period. In Germany, it's huge advances in economic situation. But by 1929, it all comes crashing down. In 1929, we've got the Wall Street crash. It leads to protectionism, it leads to tariffs, which is putting prices on imports, protecting your own exports, etc. America, more importantly, calls back its loans. You know, those loans in the Young Plan and the Dawes Plan, America wants that money back. And so that causes chaos in Europe. It causes other countries to kind of falter and fall and get dragged into this depression. So We've got the emergence of powerful dictatorships. In 1922, controlled by Benito Mussolini in Italy with the aim of rebuilding the Italian Empire. 1929, Stalin takes over from Lenin. He takes control of the USSR and he feels threatened by Germany and Italy. In the 1930s, we've got Japan effectively becoming a military dictatorship. And of course, 1933, Adolf Hitler. He comes to power with the idea of ending the Versailles Treaty and with this plan of Lebensraum and expanding space. And so the world is a very different place in the 1930s as a result of this. And this, of course, causes big issues for the League of Nations. You've got to imagine that there's all of these competing groups, and Japan in particular is an issue. In 1931, Japan invades Chinese region of Manchuria after an incident involving trains there. It leads to China appealing to the League of Nations to take action. The League takes a very cautious approach. Japan, by this point, is an exceptionally powerful member. It's one of the wealthiest countries. It's certainly economically developing very quickly. It takes a whole year, to report that Japan had acted unlawfully, when it's very obvious to an outsider to see that they had done so. In 1933, Japan ignores any and announces its intention to actually go above, invade more. The League of Nations is now in a precarious position, and by March, Japan resigns from the League of Nations. There was discussions of economic sanctions and banning weapons, but there was worries of retaliation, so they didn't do anything. There was excuses offered by the League for their failure. Japan was far away, it was a special case, there was a valid point, etc. The Manchuria crisis was so important as it showed that the League was powerless to strong nations. And of course, Hitler, Mussolini are looking on with interest. They know that they have an option here available if they wish to exercise it, and the League is going to do nothing. Now, in the wake of it, we've got the Manchurian crisis. The US President Herbert Hoover encourages Europe to come up with disarmament plans. In return, the USA wants to reduce or cancel debts. In 1932, there was a disarmament conference that got underway. Now, there were various proposals, but no one could agree on how to enforce them. And so it ends. German disarmament, though, is another matter that you can certainly revise yourself. Now, the 1930s is also known as the Dark Valley, and it's known as the failures of the League of Nations and how we slowly move towards war. In 1935, we've got Italy invading Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. All countries in Europe, Britain, France, etc., had colonies in North Africa, so it's an incredibly contentious area. Haile Selassie, the leader of Abyssinia, appeals to the League for help. Britain and France want to keep on good terms with Italy, Mussolini, as they see them as a possible ally against Hitler. They agree the Stresa Pact. Mussolini rejects any proposals which would give Italy some of the land of Abyssinia, and so they invade in 1935. The League had failed clearly. The League delays, but eventually sanctions Italy, and it uses those economic sanctions available to it. It delays oil exports on banning it, and it does not close the Suez Canal. So you can say they didn't go far enough in Abyssinia. Next, we've got the Hall-Lavelle Pact that actually gave in to Mussolini. It was leaked to the press. The British public were in uproar. They saw it as treachery to this country that was clearly much smaller. There was clearly an aggressor, and they saw it as treacherous. Italy takes full control in 1936. The League of Nations had failed, and Hitler and Mussolini signed the Rome-Berlin Access in 1936. So they actually, as a result of the inaction of the League of Nations, become stronger by joining together. Now we come to appeasement. Why was Hitler not challenged? In 1933, Hitler comes to power. He quickly asserts himself as leader and Führer of Germany on the backbone of militarism, Lebensraum, and communism, and destroying communism. He withdraws Germany from the League of Nations, which of course undermines the League of Nations further. But now we've got the 1930s being an incredibly difficult time for the League of Nations. In 1933 to 1935, he directly challenges the League of Nations. He is forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles to have an army bigger than 100,000. He ignores it. His armed forces reach a total number of 950,000. In 1935, the Saar region votes 90% in favour of rejoining Germany. And remember self-determination. This is the idea that if enough people in a particular area want to to be part of another country, they can do so and should be supported in doing so. 1936, we got the remilitarization of the Rhineland and, of course, the involvement in the Spanish Civil War. And 1936, the signing of the Axis Alliance, Japan, Italy and Germany, and the Anti-Comintern Pact. Both of these clearly show that they are going to pledge opposition to communism, that they are going to work together to form a bloc in Europe, and that's in direct opposition to the Britain and France and others. So we've got this incredibly difficult period now. Now, the policy of appeasement itself was in part because Britain did not want war. They did not want a world war. The USA had isolated itself. They did not think that they would get help, so their only option was to give in to Hitler's demands. And in reality, the USSR and Stalin was the more obvious threat. Communism was directly opposed to capitalism. The two can't exist in a friendly state. And so Britain and America were very sort of viewed this as the biggest threat in Europe. Many people in Britain also believed that Hitler had the right to disarm. A country has a right to defend itself. The Saarland had voted 90% to rejoin. The Rhineland was wrongly demilitarized. The Treaty of Versailles itself was seen as a very harsh act, and so Hitler was allowed to get away with it. Now, the outbreak of war really is a slow process that moves through. Neville Chamberlain becomes Prime Minister in 1937 and takes over. He'd actually been part of the war cabinet for the last 2 years beforehand, so he was very much heavily involved. Now, we've got discussions with France. You'd think they'd be discussing how to deal with Hitler, but they weren't. They were actually dealing with how should they avoid war for as long as possible. Now, in 1938, we've got the biggest challenge, or the first challenge. We've got the Anschluss. Germany reunites with Austria, and it's forbidden by Versailles. Hitler threatens to send troops. The King of Austria requests assistance. A vote was organised, and the end result was Britain and France did nothing. They allowed Hitler to create a very large bloc with Germany and now Austria. And of course, if you look on any map, you can see that it threatens Czechoslovakia. That will be the next country. Now, the Sudetenland and the Munich Agreement in 1938, Hitler wants Czechoslovakia. The Prime Minister Beneš asks for promises that he would be protected. Hitler threatens to invade, and it leads to crisis talks in Munich. Hitler initially moderated his demands. He said that, yep, we can reduce what we demand down. Mussolini is invited, and now it's the Four Powers Summit. Chamberlain returns victorious and says that we have peace in our time, that he has achieved something with Mr. Hitler, and that there is an agreement and an accord that nothing will happen. On the 29th of December, Mussolini agrees to join. The other leaders decide to give Hitler the Sudetenland, and that's it, and there's no more discussion. In 1939, Hitler invades the rest of Czechoslovakia, so again he'd lied. Mr. Hitler had lied, who'd have thought it. Now, his next target would be Poland, and Britain and France draw another line in the sand, and this is a line that they keep redrawing and redrawing. They want to reclaim the Polish corridor that gives them access to the port of Danzig, so they've got access to the sea, an important strategic area in World War II. Stalin, by this point, is incredibly concerned of the growing strength of Adolf Hitler in Germany, and so he agrees to join the League of Nations in 1934, and he agrees a mutual assistance pact with France in 1936. He tries to arrange an alliance with France and Britain, as he sees them as potential allies against Germany. However, it doesn't work out, and the opposite is almost achieved. It leads to the signing of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Stalin opts for an alliance with Nazi Germany, with a secret agreement to divide Poland, and that's with the belief that France and Britain are too weak to stop Hitler had he have wanted to, even if they had wanted to. On the 1st of September, Adolf Hitler takes his next chance. He invades Poland. Britain and France declare war on the 2nd of September, and by this point we now have an inevitability. There is World War II. Now, the policy of appeasement contains those points, the giving in at Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, the Munich Agreement, leading to Poland. All of this is appeasement, and the argument is that it could have been stopped at different points. Now, our next section in 4.1 is called Historical Controversies, and we're going to deal with this in a second video, just so that we can break this up. But very quickly and briefly, we've got these views. We've got 6 views of appeasement. We've given some factual information, but it isn't the whole story, and historians have debated on how much do we blame Neville Chamberlain. Did he really have a choice, or was he intelligent enough to bide time? And I'm going to leave it up to you with what to decide. Thank you very much.